Welcome to my JWT Authentication tutorial. So in this, we're going to be building a full stack project to show you how to integrate authentication with JWTs in the entire thing. So we're going to be doing this in a way where we store the access token in memory. That's what we're going to try to implement, and this is a more secure way of doing it. Now, I want to show you guys what technologies we're going to be using to actually build this project. We're going to focus on JWT in general. That's kind of the main focus of the tutorial, but we're going to be building a backend and a front end and see how they interact. And so these are the things we're going to use to do that. And don't worry if you don't know all of these. I'm going to be walking you through the entire process. So if you want to learn any of these, this is a good time. So for the whole entire project, we're going to be using Typescript. We're also going to use GraphQL and type GraphQL. This allows us to basically integrate really easily TypeScript and GraphQL together on our backend. And then we're going to be using PostgreSQL to store our users for our database. And we're going to be using typeorm to interface as our ORM. And then lastly, we're going to be using React and Apollo to tie everything together. So Apollo we're going to be using to make requests in React, and we're also going to use it as our server with Express. So we're going to be using Node.js as well. So here is just a quick overview of what we're actually going to do in this video. So to start off, we're going to build a backend. So for that, we're going to start by just setting up a GraphQL server with type GraphQL and typeorm. After that, we're going to go over how you can register a user, create a user in your database. Then we're going to log in users and get them access tokens and create refresh tokens for them. Then we're going to go over how you can create mutations and queries. So these are just routes in GraphQL. How you can authenticate them or protect them. So for example, if I want to make sure that someone has an access token before they do something, we're going to see how you can do that. Then we're going to go over how you can actually refresh a token if it expires. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how we can actually implement how you can revoke a refresh token for a specific user, or revoke all the refresh tokens for a specific user. Say if that user logs out or something, or forgets their password, or their account gets hacked, and you want to basically invalidate all the sessions. This is how we're going to do it. All right, and then after that, we are going to be doing some front-end stuff and see how our front-end actually interacts with our back-end. So first, we're going to just set up the project and set up with Apollo in GraphQL code generator. So this is going to allow us to very easily create queries and mutations that are type safe because we're using TypeScript. Then we're going to just create a couple routes using React Router and see a register and login form. And then we're going to see how we can protect those routes and we can persist the user's session. So when they refresh the page, we want to make sure that the user is still logged into their account. Then we're going to handle what happens when we make a request and the token is expired. How can we refresh the access token, but the user doesn't even realize it? They're not even logged out. We just automatically in the background handle this. And then lastly, kind of just go over how you can fetch who the current user is and say display that user in the header, or if you want to display this user in your page, how you can get the current user. So that is the plan for this video. We're going to be covering all these things, and we're going to be starting with the backend right here. Cool. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be setting up the GraphQL server and type GraphQL and typeorm. So what I have with me here is just terminal open, and I want to just start the project. And we're going to basically create some boilerplate code from typeorm to do this. So to do that, we need to install the typeorm CLI. So you can do so by running the following: npm i-g typeorm. Now I'm assuming you have Node installed on your computer. So if you don't, you're going to need that. I'm on 12.6 right now. And then I'm using npm 6.9. So when you install Node, npm will come with it. And then after that, we're going to say typeorm init. So this should install this CLI so we can now run this command. I'm calling my folder or my project server. You can call it whatever you like. I'm in basically a base folder called JWT Auth example, and I'm going to create a server folder and a web server or a web folder. And then here I specified the database I'm going to be using is Postgres. So if you want to follow exactly, use this as well. But really, the database used for this doesn't matter. We're not really doing anything database specific. All right, so you should now see a folder called server. And if you go inside of that, you should see you have a package.json with some stuff inside of it, a readme, which we can kill. tsconfig. This is kind of a tsconfig is kind of lacking. So what I would recommend is changing this. So the tsconfig that I use, I have stored in a package called tsconfig.json. So if you'd like to have the same tsconfig as I have, just run the command, run this command, npx tsconfig.json. And npx should be installed when you install npm/node. So this is basically going to download a package and then run this CLI. And what this CLI does is it asks you if you're using a React project, and in this case we're using Node, so I'd select Node, and it just puts a tsconfig with options that I prefer. All right, so we're going to be following that. And then our package.json is a little out of date when we get this project. So what I like to do is whenever you have an out-of-date package.json, you can upgrade all the dependencies inside of it by saying yarn upgrade interactive. So yarn is kind of similar to npm. I prefer using this, so I'm going to be using yarn from now on. So if you don't have that, probably want to install it. It is pretty nice. So yarn upgrade interactive -- latest. If I run this, we don't even have a lock file yet. I guess we have to run yarn to actually install these dependencies first, and then we can run this command. So let's do that. So when this is done, then we'll just rerun this upgrade interactive. And I don't know if it just automatically does it. All right, this is what I thought. So this is basically just asking us which dependencies we'd like to upgrade. So I would like to upgrade this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. So what I did here is that you just use the space bar to say you want it, and then it fills in the green dot, and then you do the up and down arrow to actually select them. And then I'm just going to do enter to install everything. All right, so the orm config actually has the information to connect to your database. So in my case, I said I'm using Postgres. It's localhost. This is the port, the username, password, and the actual database. So if you don't have Postgres installed, go ahead and install that now and create a database. So I'm going to just call my database JWT Auth example. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to say create DB JWT Auth example. So now I have a database set up. If you don't know what this is, go Google how to create a PostgreSQL database on your computer, and this is one way you can do it. So once you set up a database, put it there, and then your username and password, you're going to need to create a user for it. I have a default one called Postgres, I believe. So we'll see if this works. This should work for most ones. If you don't have a user, go create a Postgres user and stick the credentials there. All right, so once you've done that, you should be able to run this right here. And failed to load ESLint. We're not going to worry about ESLint for this. Let me just turn off ESLint real quick. So I'm just going to disable for this workspace. And we will reload. All right, so we should now be able to run this. So I believe in our package.json, yep, we can run start, and this will run this. So let's do that and see if it works. So when I do yarn start, couldn't find a, need a CD into my server. All right, so it's inserting a user, and we see this. Cool. So if you see the same output, that means it worked. And you can see the actual code for getting this to work. This is just some typeworm stuff to create a user and make sure the database connection works. So at this point, our typeworm is successfully set up. I want to just close this now. So the next thing that I want to do is actually set up our GraphQL server. So to do that, I'm going to say yarn add, and we're going to install these three packages: Express, Apollo Server Express, and GraphQL. And then we also need to install the types. So for Express and for GraphQL. Apollo already comes with them. All right, so yarn add as a dev dependency. We should have node already. Good, types.node. You need this whenever you're doing TypeScript and Node.js stuff. So this is to make sure we get good auto completion and we know the types for the GraphQL package and for the Express package. So we'll install both of those. All right, so here I'm going to import Express from Express. And we're going to create an app here. And we're going to be doing some async and await stuff. So what I want to do is I'm going to comment this out. And by the way, if you don't know how to bulk comment, you just select everything, or you can just drag like that, and then you put command and slash or control/slash, and that'll actually comment it all out. So I'm going to create a little function here. All right, so this is a Lambda function, right? And it's just calling itself, and then I put parentheses around it. And so then I'm making it asynchronous. So now inside this function block, I can actually write async and await code, and we're going to put all of our basically logic to start stuff here. All right, so we have app, then app.listen, and say port 4000. So this function gets called whenever the app starts or the server starts, so I'm just going to console log to let us know. And I'm just going to delete this for now. So just have a reflect metadata and express here. And if we want to just verify that our setup here is right, we can just say app.get. And we can ignore the first parameter. So whenever I want to just ignore the first parameter of a function, I usually just put an underscore for the variable name. But this is also known as request. You'll sometimes see that too. You just put at the beginning. So we're going to say response.send and just say hello. All right, so I'm going to just run my server to make sure it works. And so now I just want to go to localhost 4000 and then go to the index route, and it should send hello to me. So localhost 4000 / and now I see hello. So perfect. So that means Express is working correctly. So now we need to integrate the GraphQL portion. So we're going to import from Apollo Server Express, get Apollo Server, and just so you know, you can keep all your Express routes. So we can keep that there if you want to. And we're going to say new Apollo Server. And then this is where we can put settings. So I can put type defs. This is where we declare with a string our GraphQL schema. So I can say type query hello returns a string. And then I can create resolvers. So this is a object which contains a mapping. Basically we get the data that our schema needs. So we have a query and we have hello, and this returns a string of some sort. So hello world. All right, cool. So Apollo's happy with us so far. So now we're just going to say Apollo server.apply middleware, and we pass in our app. All right, so once we've done this, what's going to happen is we defined what our GraphQL stuff is here, and we have added our GraphQL stuff to our Express server here. So now, if we restart our server, see if we made any errors. Nope, looks like it started. If we go to this /GraphQL, we can see GraphQL Playground. So this is some old stuff that I've done in previous projects, but if you're coming here for the first time, it should look like this. So this is a cool thing you get when you use GraphQL. This is an interface that just allows you to query and see how everything would work. So I can go over here, click the docs, and I can see what's available to me, and I can run hello. So over here you can actually write your query. So I'm going to say hello. You can run prettify, and here we can now run it and see the result. So we can now see hello. So this is a little playground where we can run queries and see the results. So cool. So if we see that, Apollo is set up and Express is good. So let's continue on from here. The last thing I want to do in this section is just set up TypeGraphQL. So basically, this is a perfectly valid way of doing GraphQL. But when you start doing TypeScript stuff, it is harder to get the types working, and you do some duplicate work. So TypeGraphQL is something we're going to add to make our life easier. So we're going to say add TypeGraphQL. So this, did I spell it wrong? TypeGraphQL. Oh, I think there is TypeGraphQL, a dash in between it, so like that. All right, so what we're going to do is instead of creating our schema like this, we're going to create it in a different manner. So now I'm going to create a file here called resolvers, and I'm going to import from TypeGraphQL, and here I'm going to say at resolver, and here I'm going to say resolvers. So basically now I can create my GraphQL schema inside of here, and as I create it, I'm actually going to tell TypeGraphQL both my GraphQL types and my TypeScript types, and it's basically going to check both of them for me. So I'm saying that this class is a resolver, and I guess we're going to be doing user stuff, so I'm going to just call this user resolver instead of that. So let's call it user resolver. And I would like to do a query, and we're going to do hello, and this is going to return hi. So query got imported from TypeGraphQL, and here I can tell it what type it returns by putting a function here and then an uppercase type. So in this case we're returning a string, so like that. Alright, so instead of over here passing typedefs and resolvers, we basically just did the equivalent of this in our user resolver over here. That's what this is. So now I'm going to say, oops, deleted too much, schema, and we're going to say await build schema, and build schema we want from TypeGraphQL. So inside of here we're going to pass in an array of resolvers, our user resolver. Alright, so let's just recap what we did there. So we are using this build schema function from TypeGraphQL, and what it does is it takes our resolver over here and it's going to create a GraphQL schema out of it. And we do await here because this is an asynchronous function. So now we can just restart our server to make sure everything is working. Alright, so it's up and running. Come back over here, can refresh. You can see my hello one. Now if I run this, we can now say it says hi exclamation mark, and that's exactly what we have over here. So cool. So now we're going to create users, or create our register mutation. So in GraphQL, mutations are what we create when we want to update something, create something, make a change to our database. So we're going to say at mutation, and this is going to be a decorator. Let's close some of this stuff. That comes from TypeGraphQL. So this is how we define we want a mutation. And then here we're going to say register, and we're going to say return, and we can put our body and stuff inside of this. Now for our register, we need to take some arguments. So in this case, I'm going to say arg. That's coming from TypeGraphQL. I'm going to say this is going to be email, which is a string. And how this works right here is, so this is the name of the GraphQL argument. So this is what the user will actually pass in. This is my variable name. I call it email, same name. This is the TypeScript type. Now, type GraphQL can infer what this type is. But if it could not infer, what we can do is we can say as our second parameter here, a function, and it will automatically know. Right, so this is us explicitly saying that this argument is of the type string. But explicit should be fine for this. Oops. So we'll just do this. All right, and then I also want a password. All right, so we now have two arguments, email, password, that are being passed in. And now inside of here, I want to create my user. Now I'm going to want to create the user in my database. So we're going to start with how do we actually define our database and create the schema for it. That's what our entity is over here. So our entity, so you can see this is how you do stuff in Typeform, is you create a class, you add fields. Each field usually maps to a column, and those are database columns. So in this case, I'm going to create two columns called email and password. And I'm going to keep this ID field. That's all well and good. And we'll give that a save. And I'm going to say here extends base entity. This is just a Typeform thing that'll allow us to say user.save and allow us to do commands like that. It's a little bit easier. It's called the active record pattern. So we're going to be using that. And you'll notice all this is coming from Typeform over here, and you annotate this class with entity to say that this is a database table and that these are the columns. We can also explicitly say the name of our table. So I'm going to just call mine users here. That way it doesn't have a conflict with the user table. But again, you can call this whatever you like. So the next thing is, how do we actually tell Typeform to create this and know this exists? Well, one, in our ORM config, we have an entity mapping. So you see how it says source entity, and that's where all our stuff is located. So that's how it knows about it. And then in our index over here, we just need to create a connection like this. So at the start, I'm going to say await create connection. And that's pretty much all you need to do with Typeform. So now the connection is created. It knows where your entities are, and it knows what the connection information is, all from your ORM config. So if any of that stuff is wrong, this is where you go to fix it. Okay, so we create our database connection. We have our database set up. Do we have it set up to synchronize? We do. So what this means is it's going to automatically create the database tables for us, and that's what we want. So now in our resolver over here, we can do something like user.insert, and we can insert our user inside of there. So I want to make this function asynchronous, so we can do this. Now, rule number one is you don't just do email and password. You want to hash your password before you store it in the database. So we're going to be good citizens and do that as well. Now, feel free to use a better hash than this, but I'm just going to use bcrypt. So if you want to use Argon, go for it, but we're just going to use bcrypt.js for this. And then I'm going to say add a dev dependency and install the types. So some libraries come with TypeScript types, some don't. This one doesn't, so we need to add it separately. All right. All right, so we're going to import bcrypt, and then we can pick which function we want here. I'm going to choose the hash one. So this is going to be the hashed password is equal to hash. And here we pass in our string, which is the current password, and then assault, I'm just going to go with 12. And we're going to pass await here because this is an async by default. If I hover over this, you can also see that this is a promise. All right, so now we're going to pass in this hashed password. Also, I'm not sure what this is complaining about. Let's see what it's. String is not assignable. Oh. We go to our user entity here. I left this as a number. It should be a string. And by the way, the database columns are automatically inferred that this should be a text column, but you can explicitly say what the data type of your column should be with typearm as well. So I can say this is a Postgres text column. And by the way, if you saw me just like hop back over to my entity file, the way I did that, where was I here, is control and then command and then click on it. And it takes you to where it was created. All right, so I can insert my user into the database this way. So now what do we want our mutation to actually return? Well, we could just return a Boolean true or false whether it worked. So I'm going to say it returns a Boolean, and we're going to say true, it worked. And if we want to just do a try catch, we could. And on the error, we're going to log it and return false. It did not work. All right, so this is going to be our register function. So I'm going to go ahead and start the server. Now you notice we're constantly stopping and starting the server. Let's make our lives a little bit easier. So there's a package called node daemon that can restart this for us. So we're going to install this guy. And this is a dev dependency, so I added -d. All right, so I have this yarn log here. We don't really need that. Let's kill it. So now, in our package.json, in the script's start, we are going to say node daemon -- exec in front of it. So basically, we're telling it what to run here. And then this is going to go ahead and automatically restart when we make a change to our server. All right, so we're going to start this up. And so let's go ahead and see our docs here. I can see the registers there. So mutation, we're going to say register. I'm going to say email Bob, password Bob. So we run this, we get a true, so that means it worked correctly. If it didn't, go check your logs, see what went wrong with your register. Now to make sure we can actually see this guy in the database, I thought real quick we might as well just make a query for this. So let's make a query, and we can call this users, and then we can just return all the users in our database. And then we're going to say user.find. Right, so this is a query that finds all of our users in our database and then returns them. So here I want to return an array of users, so I'm going to do this. So the only thing that may be a bit odd is this data type here. So you notice we have user. If we click that, that is this class right here. So we can actually use this type as a type GraphQL type, or as a GraphQL type. And the way we do that is by saying that this is an object type. And we can just annotate these fields. So we can have a field type here and a field type here. And I don't want to expose the password. So we can choose which fields we want to expose and which we don't. So I don't care to show the hashed password. So all I'm going to do is expose these two fields. Also, it's going to infer a string. It cannot infer number because it doesn't know whether it's an integer or a float. So we're just going to do int here. And this is coming from type GraphQL. All right, so save. Our server should be restarting here. And you'll notice the error we got before we add this object type. Well, before. So this is the error you'll get if you do not add the object type and actually set a GraphQL type. It'll say cannot determine GraphQL output. Here it's at the bottom. Cannot determine GraphQL output for type users. So that'll happen whenever you don't actually explicitly specify the type here as an object type when you use it as a type here. So that's how you do an array of users, and we specify what fields we want to expose. So now if I come back over here, can do a new tab, can grab all of our users, can grab the email and ID field. Nice. You can see our dude there. So now go ahead and add more users if you like, and see, fetch them here and make sure that works for you. That is how you register users. So now let's go ahead and log in these users and give them an access and refresh token. So to do this, we're going to create a new mutation. And actually, I'm going to just copy the one we have here, because we can keep some similar attributes or structure. So this is going to be login. It's going to take an email and a password. And the first thing that we're going to do with our login function here is see if this user exists. So we're going to say the user is equal to user.findOne. We're going to await this, and then we're going to say where the email is equal to this email. All right, so we're searching to find this email, and if a user does not exist, we just want to throw some kind of error. So we could just say throw it error invalid login. Right? We could just give some generic error, or we could be more specific. Could not find user. So depending on your use case and specs, pick whatever error message you want, but we couldn't find a user to actually log them in. The next thing is we need to actually compare the password and see if they passed in the right one. So we're going to say valid is equal to, and this comes from bcrypt, and we're going to get the compare function. So we're going to say compare, and looks like we pass in the plain text string. So that's this. And then the hashed password, which is going to be user.password. All right, so now we have this valid boolean. So if it's not valid, right, you can throw an error. And they pass in a bad password. But if both these things are right, the user has successfully logged in. Right? They have successfully logged in, so at this point we want to give them the tokens so they can stay logged in, and they can use that to access other parts of our website, or our API, or our GraphQL schema, all that jazz. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to return the access token. So here we're going to say access token and actually return what that value should be. The refresh token we're going to pass in a different place, which we're going to talk about in a second. But first I want to just match our mutation type here and make sure it all lines up. So here I'm going to create a new object type called login response, and this is a class, and this just returns an access token, which is a string, and this is a type GraphQL field. So login response is what we're going to return, and if you want to get the Typescript checking it, you can put it here too. And this should be promise. So now we told type GraphQL what the GraphQL type is. It is an object which has a single field, access token, and it's a string. And then we also said Typescript verify that we are returning a promise of the type login response. So like if I got rid of a character there, it's going to tell me it's wrong because it's expecting this format. So cool. So that's set up the types. Let's go ahead and actually return the correct token now. So to do that, we are going to install a new library. So we're going to add a library called JSON Web Token. So this is a library that just helps us create and validate JWTs. And we need to add the types for it. So we're going to do yarn add -d types. So here we're going to say sign. So here I can say sign, and sign is the function you call to actually create a token. So what you pass it is a payload, so what you actually want to be stored inside of this token. So in this case, I'm going to store the user ID, but you could store more info if you want, like the email, profile, whatever you care about. The second parameter is the secret. Alright, so this is a random string. You can just create it like that for now if you want to. This is a string you need to hold on to, because this is the secret that we use to verify whether the token is valid or not. And the last one, if we hover over, we can see is the options that we have available to us. And the thing that we care about in this particular case is expires in. So in this case, I'm going to set how long my token should be valid for. And I'm getting a little off screen, so let's pull this up. Okay. So I'm going to say 15 minutes. But again, depending on your use case, you can set this to a different time. But in general, you want your access token set to something shorter. So like 60 minutes, maybe a week is probably too long. I'm going to set mine to just 15 minutes. And we may come back and change this to something even shorter for testing, but we can keep this for now. So let's go ahead and just run this and make sure we actually get some kind of token back from this. So we're going to start our server back up. And by the way, I didn't really show that. I control C to get out of this. That was kind of assumed, but I should probably say, if you want to cancel out of this being run, you can control C. Okay, so do a little refresh. We should see a login now. So if I run this, I can see my Bob user. So let's try to log in with Bob. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say bob at bob.com 1. So this is an incorrect, oh, and we also have to, there we go, ask for an access token back. So you notice I put the wrong email in. Nice, I just want to make sure we got the error could not find user. Now I have the wrong password. And we got a problem, this did not work. So let's go back and see what I did wrong. And I see my error immediately. I just forgot to await compare. So if we hover over it, we can see that the compare should return a promise. So we'll wait, give that a save. Now let's try this again. Wait for our server to start back up here. Alright, and I'm going to run this again. And nope, this is exactly the error we expect, bad password. So now if I put in my real password, Bob, nice, we get our access token now. And so cool, so this worked. This is our JWT that we actually want. Perfect. And that's kind of how I want my JWT to be created and returned like this. So now I want to create a refresh token as well. So let's do that. Now the refresh token is a little bit different because we want to store this in a cookie. So to store it in a cookie, we actually need to use the express res, and we need to say res.cookie to create a cookie. So to get access to this, we need to access the context or pass this in through the context in GraphQL. So how do I do what I just said? Well, over here what we're going to do is we're going to say context, and this is in our Apollo server. We're in our index right now. We're going to grab the response and put it inside of here. That's all there is to it. And while we're here, we're going to also pass in the request. So there we go. So the request and the response are now inside of our context. So in our GraphQL resolvers, we can access both of these. All right, so I also need to create a context type. So I'm going to say my context.ts, and I'm going to export an interface. This is just for TypeScript purposes. So I'm going to say rec is equal to express. I think I want to, I just want to make sure I get this type correct. I'm going to hover over this, and this is what, response. And we'll try auto importing these. I think I want to do it like this: request and response. Cool, so I think I set this up correctly. So now what I can do is, in my user resolver over here, I can say at CTX, stands for context, and make sure you do a comma here. And now we have access to the context here. And you'll notice I also am using my myContext type. I'm importing that. So now I can destructure this, and I can do request and res is inside of there. So at context, this is just a type GraphQL thing to get us access to the context. All right, so in this case, all I care about is the response here. So here I can say response.cookie, and I can say the name my cookie. Call it JID. This is something where I kind of just usually pick a generic ID name, so really no one knows what the heck it is. So we're just going to do that. And then for the value, this is where we're going to pass in our actual token. So that's where we're going to do something like this. Now in my refresh token, you may want to store different attributes. Personally, I'm just going to store the user ID again in this, so I can know who this is for. And then the value here, you're going to want to put a different secret than what you used here. So I'm going to do some other value. And then lastly, our options. You're probably going to want to make this last longer. So the shortest I would probably do is maybe 7 days. So this is something where maybe the user hasn't accessed your site for some amount of time. So whether you want to make that a single day, maybe 7 days, maybe a year, if they haven't logged in, then this is going to log them out and this token has expired. So pick whatever time you want. I'm going to go with 7 days. I think that's a pretty good length of time. If they haven't visited my website in a week, we make them re-log in. Lastly, you have some options for the actual cookie itself, the domain, whether it's HTTP only, some other stuff. So we're going to set HTTP only to true. That way it cannot be accessed by JavaScript. We're going to come back and probably set the domain and the path later, but we're going to come back to that. But just note you have options available when you're creating this cookie. Now we're going to actually see if we get a cookie back. So this is the interesting and fun part. So I'm going to open the inspector here, and I'm going to click network, and you can see the basically requests going out here. So I'm going to clear this. You can see there's kind of a task that goes in the background that's just constantly pinging. We're going to ignore that. So we're just going to have to clear that. I'm going to run it real quick. And then if you click on the right one, it should have your login here. You can see I got an access token back. And we can see if we get a cookie back. In my case, cool, it worked. I'm actually a little surprised that it did work, but I'm glad it did. So I can see the response. It says JID here. You can see the value. That means I got a cookie back, so it is working. Sometimes you have to mess with cores to get this working. The other thing you need to make sure you do is to go in your settings, and settings is this cog over here. Where is it? I think it's set credentials. There it is. So request.credentials. By default, this is set to omit. Make sure it says the word include, and then retry the request and see if the request here you have cookies. You can also go to the headers and look at the response headers. You should see a response header that says set cookie like this. If that worked, then you are correctly sending cookies back. But you will not get a cookie back if you are not doing this. So make sure you're doing this part. That's very important. All right, so assuming that worked for you, we have successfully logged in the user and sent them back a refresh token and an access token. So now we're ready to start cleaning this up a little bit. So what I mean by that is we are kind of just putting the creation of the tokens inlined here. I want to abstract them into their own functions and treat these secrets in a better way. I want to store them in environment variables. This is a good place to put them because you actually don't want anyone else seeing your secret, and you may want to use different secrets in development versus production. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create a new file here just called auth.ts where I'm going to stick this stuff. So I'm going to say export const create access token. And inside of this, actually we don't need to make it async, but we're going to take a user as a parameter. Will it auto import for us? Oh, it won't. The user that we're going to accept here is just our entity over there. So import from /entity /user. And so now here we're just going to say return, and then I'm going to copy this. So now if we need to create the access token in other places, we can. And this is coming from JSON Web Token. And then we're going to do the same for this one. So create refresh token. Takes a user, and then we're going to return this. So now back over here, you can just say create refresh token. And it's making me sad I'm not getting auto completion, so I'm just going to reload my window. If you hit Command P and then or Command Shift P, it'll automatically add the caret for you. If you say reload window, that's how I'm running this command right here. But what I'm going to do is we're going to call this function, and we're going to call the other function right here. So refresh token, pass in our user, create access token, pass in our user. So now we have a really nice, easy function we can call whenever we need to create one of these tokens. Alright, so now here I talked about how I didn't want to just store the secret here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a .env file. Inside of here, I'm going to say, I'm going to put my caps lock on, access token secret, and then this I'm going to just write some random characters, and then my refresh token, refresh. Alright, so then to read this environment file, what I like to do is yarn add. By the way, it gets rid of any terminals you had open too when you refresh the window. I was surprised mine went away. So I'm going to install a package called .env. This goes ahead and, if we say in our index file here, import .env/config, it's going to read in those two variables. And to make sure this all worked, we can say process.env dot, and then the name of our variable to make sure it worked. Alright, so let's get rid of some of these. So now if I start my server, oh, you know what? Did I? Yeah, I did. So I accidentally installed the packages in the wrong. I installed the packages in the root. So I'm going to get rid of that. I did not mean to do that. In my server folder, that's where I want to install .env. Alright. Now we'll restart this and see if it works. Oh, import sign, and we never used it. So yeah, we're done with our JSON Web Token import inside of our user resolver now. So we can delete that. And cool, so I can see my 2 secrets there. Perfect. So I'm going to remove that because I don't actually want to console log them because they're secrets for a reason. And so now what I'm going to do, my auth file over here, I guess we'll paste them. So instead of putting just a string there, I'm going to put the environment variable as the secret. Now for TypeScript, it gets mad at this because it's possibly undefined. I'm going to just put an exclamation point to say I know it's defined and assert that it's not going to be undefined. So to make sure everything works, make sure you actually pass your secrets in. Okay, so there we go. So now we have the stored environment variables and we have cleaned this up a little bit. The next thing is, now we're passing tokens back, we kind of have authentication that we can do now for routes. And what I mean by that is I can create a route and I can protect it now. So we have hello, let's create a function called by. So let's say I only want users that are logged in to be able to access this query for whatever reason. So to do this, the easiest way is for us to check whether the access token is in the header and then validate if it's correct. Now, to be able to repeat that logic easily, we're going to stick it in a function and we're going to stick it in some middleware to make it easy. So we're going to say use middleware, and this is from which library? Yep, type GraphQL. And so what I can pass here is basically a function that gets access to the variables and the context, and it can check whether the user should have access to this. So you can see this is of type middleware. We're going to copy this because we're going to need this to create our middleware function. We can even create our function inside of here. That way we get type definitions. So this, if we hover over it, I think it should give us what the values of each thing is. I imagine this is a parent. Okay, I destructure this. So we have access to the context is the thing that we care about. And then the second, I believe, is next. Yep. So what next does is this returns the actual resolver, or goes to the next middleware. So we can have as many middlewares as we want running before our resolver runs. And so next is what tells you that you're done with the current middleware logic. So you want to make sure and have this at the very end of all your middlewares. So what we want to do is access the context, and we don't actually have specified what the context value is. All right, let's just create a new file. I think that'll be simplest. We can call auth is auth middleware. Let me get rid of the word middleware. I'm just going to call this is auth. It's a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and is auth is what's going to be passed here. Okay. So what this is going to be is a middleware, and I want this from type GraphQL. Does this thing not exist? Middleware function will do. And then we need to pass in what our context is in angle brackets. So now if I do context.rec, yay, we get autocompletion now. So we want to get access to the headers, and the one we care about is authorization or authentication. I forget actually whether people call it authorization or authentication. Let's call it authorization. That sounds nice. So here we're going to say authorization. Okay, so this is the logic we're going to check first. So we expect the user to send a header called authorization of the format where it says bearer in front, a space, and then the actual token looks like something like that. So we're going to put in a try catch in case anything goes wrong. We're going to say authorization dot split by space, and the token should be the second value here. So it's possibly undefined. Yep. So if they did not pass in authorization, throw new error, not authenticated. So if the user didn't pass in a header when they made this request, then we know just to throw this error that they're not authenticated. Next thing that we're going to try is parsing out a token. So we're splitting by strings and getting the second value, and that's going to be our token. And then here we're going to say validate, will autocomplete for me, import from JSON web token. Is it not? Oh, it's verify, not validate. There you go. So we're going to call verify, and what this returns is a payload. So now if we hover over this, we can see what we need to pass in. The token itself, and then our secret, and then any other options. I don't think there's any other options we want to pass in. We're just going to pass in this token right here, and then we're going to pass in a secret. So the secret we're going to pass in is the env, and it's going to be this one right here. So the access token is what we expect. And so I'm going to console log any kind of error that we get here. And so if something went wrong, for whatever reason we could not get the payload, or for whatever reason the token could not be split, or maybe it verified it and the token was bad, all these things mean that the user did not give us a good token and they're not authenticated. So we can just throw this error. Otherwise, if it got past this, everything worked. Because verify throws a error if it is expired or invalid. And then it's going to return either a string or an object. This is whatever the payload. And when I say payload, that's what this thing right here. When we signed our token, that's the payload, whatever we pass in as an object here. And then the same secret that we used to sign our token, we have to use to verify it here. All right, so the payload we can actually just store on the context, and that's what I'm going to do. So here I'm going to say payload is an optional object which has the user ID. So if the user is logged in, this payload is there. So here I'm going to say context.payload is equal to payload. So I'm setting it here, that way I can access it later. Yeah, that's what I figured. So this is of type string or object. So I'm just going to say this is of type any and pass it into the context here. So now in my resolver, I can say context.payload and have access to the current user ID of the user. So let's see this in action. All right, so we're going to say by in our by function, and we're also going to say, and actually instead of by, just say your user ID is, and then pass the user ID of the user. So we can get this by accessing the context. And then inside of here, we're just going to say payload. And because we have isAuth checking things, if we didn't get a payload, then isAuth is going to throw an error, so it's not even going to get here. So we know we can just do payload dot user ID, and it should be there. We can even do a CL of the payload to make sure that worked too. Okay, so we did a lot of stuff there. Let's see this in action, test it out. So context, we don't need an isAuth. Okay, so server restarted. Try it out. All right, so we have our access token available here. It probably expired by now. So first thing I'm going to do is we can add headers right here. I haven't added any headers. So I'm going to just try doing by and calling it, see what happens. So cool, we got not authenticated. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say authorization and then I'm going to say bearer space, right, and I can put some garbage value and ran again, get not authenticated. Let's go ahead and log in the user and copy this token and see what we get. All right, so we have authorization, and let me pull this up, make sure you guys can see this. So authorization space or colon, we do bearer space and then the actual value. So this is just a standard way of usually passing in your token. So we'll follow that standard. And let's run this. And cool. So it saw that we have a valid token passed in, and it gave us a ID of 1 back. Now if we just like mess with this token a little bit, you know, got rid of the ID, you can run this. You can see it not authenticated. This is an invalid token that we passed in. And so there you go. That is how we can now authenticate different queries or mutations. So to recap what we did, and we can see what the errors are here. JWT malformed if you want to, and you can do different things depending on what the happened with the variable or the token. So maybe the token expired, maybe it's invalid, maybe it's malformed, maybe it has the wrong secret. So you can do different things depending on that. But to recap what we did is now we have this isAuth function, which we can add to any query or any mutation. It's going to run before our resolver. And what it does is it's going to read the header and verify that the header itself in the token is correct. And if it is correct, it's going to set the payload inside the token to the context. That way we can actually access it inside of our resolver here. And so now we have a very easy way where we can put this all over our project and we can access the token's value inside our resolver. So there you go. That is how I like to authenticate different routes or resolvers in GraphQL. Now we're going to handle the case where we make a request and our token has expired. Since our access token only lasts for 15 minutes, we need a way to pass a refresh token in and get a new access token. So that's what we're going to build now. And we're actually not going to do it using GraphQL. This will make more sense later, but basically we only want our access to or refresh token to be sent for this particular request. And so for our cookie only to be sent on a single route or request, we need to give it a specific path. So what we're going to do is create a special route in Express that handles refreshing. So we're going to come over here and create an app.post, and I'm going to say /refresh_token. And so this particular route is specifically designed to handle refreshing the JWT token. And so I don't want to go to /GraphQL. That's our normal route we go to when doing this. And so what I can do is I can say our cookie only works on this route. And that helps with security purposes where our token only gets sent when we are refreshing. So that's why I'm not doing it with GraphQL. I want to make a special route for it. So that's why we're going to be doing it this way. And so we have this app.post, and basically what we need to do is we need to read the refresh cookie, and that's what we're going to do first, and that's what we're going to start with. So we're going to do that, and we need to validate that that token is correct, and then we can send them back a new access token. So to start off with, I'm just going to say request.cookies and, well, not .cookies, .header, I mean. And so what rec.headers does is we can just print the headers that are sent to this post route. And the reason why I'm going to do it this way is I just want to make sure we have everything set up first correctly. Because now to test if this route is working, we're no longer going to be using GraphQL Playground like we have been using. I'm going to be using Postman. So you can use whatever you want to test this out, but you need to have some kind of a tool to send a post request. I'm going to use something called Postman. So if you want to install this, you can. It's spelled like this. If you want to just use curl or whatever you have as a tool, go ahead and do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I can actually send a cookie over here. So I'm going to have this saved, and I can open up my server that's running and just make sure that it's being sent over here. So the first thing I'm going to do, we're going to make a new request here. It's going to be a post request, and we're going to send this to localhost 4000/refresh token. And I'm going to add a cookie. Domain is localhost. We're going to add a cookie. So my cookie name here is going to be JID, and the value is going to be just a random string or something like that. Save. So this is just to demonstrate us sending a token. And now let's go ahead and hit send. Now if I come over here, I can see the cookie was sent. Perfect. And I can see the value of it. So that looks like the cookie is being sent correctly. We're going to cancel the request because I actually forgot to end the response. Alright, cool. So now that we have that working, I want to just install now a library that will parse this cookie and put it into an object. And so that's going to be called cookie parser. So we're going to say yarn add cookie parser. And we're going to install the types for it. So now we're going to import cookie parser. And yeah, I didn't think there was a default. I think it's just default import. So this is Express middleware. And what we can do is we can just say app.use cookie parser. And you want your middleware to run before any of your routes, so I'm going to put it all the way up here. Alright, so I have this. So now if I do rec, I believe cookies, I think this is the correct variable now. I believe this is going to parse the cookie string and put it into this. So now let's do yarn start, run it again, make sure that works. Alright, so our server's up. We're going to go ahead and send our request. And now nice, we see a nice object broken out between the variable name and the actual value. So now let's get into the actual logic of this. So this is going to be const token is rec.cookies.jid. So that's just whatever I called it, right? And so here I'm going to say if we didn't get a token, we're just going to return. And here we're going to say response dot send, and here we're going to say OK is false and access token is just an empty string. So we just don't send them back an access token. So now assuming we got a token back, I want to validate that the token is actually something we created. So I'm going to say const, and we can try catch this. Try catch. And we can console log any error we get. And if we get an error, we're going to go ahead and return a false response. And so inside of here, it's going to be the payload. And I'm going to create the payload up here. So here we're going to verify from JSON Web Token the token, passing in our process.env, and I called it refresh token secret. So we're just making sure that this secret was used to sign this token and the token hasn't expired. Alright, so I'm just going to say this payload is of type any. So if we get to this point in the code, we know that the token is valid and we can send back an access token. So what I'm going to do is in the payload here, I have access to payload.userid. And so I'm going to use that user ID to get the current user. So I'm going to make this an async function. That way I can say user, and then I'm going to say dot find one, and then we're going to say ID is using this ID. And then we're going to wait. And if for whatever reason we can't find a user, we can return this back, though we should get a user from this if it made it to this point. And so then we can just say OK is true and send back a new access token. So we're going to call our create access token function, passing in our user. And so there you go. You can add extra logic to this refresh if you like, but this is a bare minimum and it will work. So let's recap what we did. So first off, we read this cookie, which should be our refresh token. We make sure we actually get a token, else we throw an error. Well, not throw, we're just returning an error. Then here, we are making sure that the token has not expired and it's valid. If there's some error with it, we return false. Then we use the payload. And if we go back to our auth function, we stored a user ID in the payload. And we use that to fetch a user in our database. If we find the user, we create a new access token for them. Otherwise, we just return out if we didn't. So now let's test this, make sure it works. So server's up and running. All right, so now let's go ahead and run this. We can see OK is false, access token's empty. Makes sense, we didn't send a good token. Now, I thought this would be kind of fun. Let's try sending an access token. Right, so let's copy this and let's send this. So we're gonna go into our cookie, paste this. So this should not work because it is using the wrong secret. So if I send this, we can send, it says OK is false. And if I go to my server logs, we can actually see what the error is. It says invalid signature. Right, so that's just, it was signed with the wrong secret, that JWT. So now the last thing I want to make sure that this does work is I'm going to just go to the network tab over here, clear this, and I'm going to try logging in. I'm going to click on that response and actually copy the response cookie. So I'm actually going to go over to the header. I can see this set cookie JIT is equal to, and I'm going to copy the value of this token. So you can see it goes to 2 lines, but this is the thing that we want to copy. And then I'm going to paste it over here, make sure it works. So paste this in. Cool. Now I'll save that. So now we're going to send this cookie up. Now hopefully what will happen is we get a new access token back. So we'll send, and cool, so it worked. So it used that refresh token that we got when we logged in, and it gave us back a new access token. And as long as our refresh token is valid, we can keep running this and get new access tokens. Now another thing that we could add here, if we wanted to, is whenever they refresh their access token, we can also refresh the refresh token, because the refresh token could expire in, say, 7 days. So let's add that logic here as well. So we can just copy what we did in our user resolver over here. And create a refresh token like so. So this just creates a new refresh token and sends it back as an HTTP only cookie. And so the purpose of this is because we said that the refresh token expires in 7 days. If we ever refresh the token, we should also give them a new refresh token. So this means that the user could be stayed logged in for longer than 7 days if they continually use the website. And we can also split this off into a separate function. So send refresh token. Export const send refresh token. Because we're now using it in 2 places, so whatever options I pass in here, I want it to work in both places. So all I need to do this is a response from express, and then a token. So now I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and pass my token in here. So now I have this logic encapsulated, so if I ever want to change the name of the cookie or change any options, it updates in all the places. So now I can just say send refresh token, and sadly it did not auto import. And we can pass in res and this. And we can manually import this. And so now I can call this in my resolver over here. Awesome. So now I have that in both places. We're good. And we have our refresh token working. So now whenever our access token expires, we can call this endpoint and we can send our refresh token and it'll send us back a new access token. Now we're going to set up a system where we can revoke these refresh tokens. So the idea is if the user maybe forgets their password or maybe their account gets hacked, we want to revoke all the sessions that user has. And there's a couple ways we can do this. We can set up like a blacklist or a whitelist of the tokens that we've used. But there's this method that I quite like that's very simple, where basically we keep the version of a token and we can increment this version and it will invalidate all the old tokens. And so that's what we're going to implement. So how it works is we're going to go to our user. So I'm going to command click this user here. And we're going to add a new field on here. So this field, let's call it token version. And this is a number, it's an integer. And if we do comma and then an object here, we can pass in extra options. So I'm going to say default and default it to 0. So now what's going to happen is whenever we create a refresh token, we're going to pass what the current token version is. So let's go to our auth file over here, and we're going to just pass in our refresh token here the token version. All right, so now we're going to pass this version. So let's just follow the chain of logic here. So it starts at 0, so we're going to save the 0 inside of this token. Then what's going to happen is when we actually refresh the token, which we're doing in the index over here, we're going to check if the version matches the version saved in the user. So assuming we found a user, we're going to add one last check here. So we're going to say if user.token version does not equal the version that's in the payload, so payload.token version, then we know that the token is invalid. So now all that we have to do to invalidate the tokens for a particular user is we change the token version. So usually we are going to increment this version, is the way I'm going to do it here. So we're going to go to our user resolver over here, and we're just going to create a new function or new mutation that we're going to allow. Well, see, this is not really something we normally expose to other people to be able to revoke the tokens for somebody. But in this particular case, this will be simplest for us for just testing purposes. So don't actually make a mutation like this, but instead create a function that you can call, for example, in a forget password, or that you can internally use if someone's account gets hacked. So this mutation can just return a boolean, and we're just going to say revoke tokens for user. And specifically, this revokes the refresh tokens. So let's be specific. Revoke refresh tokens for a user. And we'll just take a single argument, which is the user ID. So user ID, and this should be a number. So we have to explicitly say that this is an integer. And we import that from type GraphQL. Alright, so this user ID, to update this, we basically just want to increment the version, the token version. So here in type, we'll type orm. The way we can do this is we have to get the repository. This is one way you can do it. So we can say get connection dot get repository for the user, and then there's an increment function that we can call. And so we pass in how we find it, so by the ID. We pass in what the field we want to increment. In this case, we call it token version. And then we say by how much we want to increment, just 1. And all right, so we have a wait here, so we need to do async. And we're just going to return true. So now what's going to happen is, let's say I create a bunch of refresh tokens. Well, you wouldn't create a bunch, but let's say the user were to come in and log in. So let's say I've logged in as Bob. So, oh, my server's down. Let's run it. So we're basically going to log in as Bob here. We're going to come to the network and see what the refresh token is. Cool, so we're back up. Log in as Bob. We get our access token. And I'm going to look for the login request and grab the cookie for it. So I'm going to get to the set header and copy this. Now, if I want to just see what this looks like, I can go to JWT.io. And here they allow you to paste your JWT and you can see what the payload is. So I'm going to paste this in just to show you guys what's in my payload right here. So I can see that it has a token version of 0. So I can go ahead and we can go to Postman over here. We can pass in our cookie. Go to save. And we can request new access tokens. And as long as our refresh token is valid, we can do this as many times as we want. Right? So now what we want to do is we want to revoke this refresh token. So we can come back over here and we're not going to actually revoke this specific token, but we're going to revoke all refresh tokens that this user has. So if we come to our users over here, we can see my Bob user has an ID of 1. So we can say mutation, revoke refresh tokens for a user 1, and there's nothing we need here. And we're going to run this. So it says true. So now what should happen is when we try to refresh our token, it's going to come and see that the token version inside of the JWT is 0, but we just incremented it to 1 on our user. So now when I come over here and try to refresh with this refresh token, it's going to say, sorry, you can't refresh with that token anymore. So this is a simple way that I like to use to just wipe out all the sessions for a particular user. Now note, as long as the user has an access token, they can still do things. So what this will do is if you revoke sessions for a user, it's going to be at most 15 minutes the user can still access the API. And this is based off of our is off, or not is off, or just off. The amount of time that you pick here. So this is where the amount of time you pick for your access token could matter. So if I revoke all the sessions for a user or all the refresh tokens, they can still access the token with their access token for 15 minutes or so. Okay, so that's that. We saw it getting revoked. Now you'll notice when we log in, the new refresh tokens that we're creating are with an incremented token version. So we can grab another one. And I can grab this refresh token and I can paste it here. And so now you can see this refresh token has a token version of 1. And so that's how it'll work. And so this also you can keep track of how many times has a user's account needed to forget their password or to they got their account hacked, that you need to revoke all of the refresh tokens. So there you go. That is how you can revoke refresh tokens. So we're pretty much done with the back end. So now we're going to move into setting this up on the front end and how we can actually authenticate in React and refresh tokens and all that fun stuff. So we're going to head back over here and set up the React project, and we're going to use create React app to do that. So I went ahead and already ran this because it needs to install a few things. But what you're going to run is npx create React app, then whatever you want to call it. I called mine web, and then we're going to do the -- TypeScript flag so it installs with TypeScript. So when you do this, you should get a new folder with all the React stuff inside of it. So I'm just going to cd into this web folder, and the first thing that I want to do is set up Apollo and be able to make a request to our server. So I have the server running in a separate terminal tab, and I'm just going to keep that running. So there's a few files we can kill. I don't need app.css, app.test, or index.css, or the logo.svg. And you know what? Let's kill a service worker too. So the things that I'm leaving here is just the index, and here we can kill these two imports. So we just have this left, and in our app.tsx we can clear the return out here and just say hello and remove these two imports. So we're just going to simplify this a little bit and start from that. And let's go ahead and just run the project and make sure it's working. So I'm going to say yarn start, and then we're going to start adding some stuff to it. Okay, I'm not going to worry about this warning. This just has different TypeScript versions. Also going to kill the README. Just don't want that in my project. Alright, so from here we are going to start by adding Apollo. It says hello here, so it looks like it is working. So to add Apollo, inside of our web folder or our React project, we're going to add 3 packages: Apollo Boost, Apollo React Hooks, and GraphQL. So we're going to add all 3 of these dependencies, and then we also need to install the types for GraphQL. Apollo already comes with them, so we don't need to install it for that library. And then when this is complete, what we're going to do is create a Apollo client. So we're going to say import Apollo client from Apollo Boost, and it looks like my yarn might have failed, but I think it still installs it. So I'm not going to worry about that error. I've seen that before. So we're going to say yarn add dev dependency, the GraphQL types. Alright. If I hover over this, we can see if TypeScript is picking stuff up. Another thing that you can do is if you ever see TypeScript kind of just loading or sitting and looking like it's not working, is if we do Command-Shift-P, open up our menu, you can type TypeScript restart server and run this restart TS server command. And that usually fixes stuff. That sometimes fixes things when auto imports aren't working in VS Code too. So cool, now I see it. It looks like it's working better now. So we're going to create our client, which is equal to an Apollo client. And here we're just going to pass in the URL to our server, which is at HTTP localhost 4000 / GraphQL. So I'm going to close this. Next, we just need to wrap our entire application in an Apollo provider. And this is coming from the hook library. At least I believe hooks comes with, comes with the Apollo provider, perfect. And now we're going to pass this Apollo client that we created here to our Apollo provider. So now in our project, we can use the Apollo hooks library and make requests to our server. So in our app over here, we're going to say use query, and we're just going to make our first query to our server. So I'm going to say query, and by the way, this is how we, oh wait, I just passed it like this. I haven't actually used use query directly in a while, and we'll see why in a second when we add GraphQL code generator. But here, I'm going to say GQL in front of it. So this is how we're going to actually make GraphQL requests to our server. So here we can say, you'll see I said GQL, which auto-imported from GraphQL tag, which really, we didn't install GraphQL tag. It's really coming from Apollo Boost. So you could also import it like that. So inside of here, we're going to actually write our GraphQL query that we want to run. So usually what I like to do is go to the GraphQL playground and copy the query from here, because I get auto completion and it's syntax highlighting and it's easier to write. So let's do that. So I'm just going to write a query called hello. This is just our simplest one to make sure it's working. And we see hi here. Perfect. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, and then data loading. So I'm going to say if loading, return loading. Otherwise, I'm just going to turn data into a string and display that so we can see what data is. And let's come over to our React app. Module cannot be found. Oh, well, also my server. So over here, I've actually never seen this before. I'm just going to try restarting the server and see if it fixes itself. Otherwise, we may need to add like to our tsconfig something maybe. It could be causing the error. But what I expect to happen is when we, okay, yeah, it looks like I just need to restart the server there. So we should expect, I was expecting possibly an error, but it looks like it worked just fine. So that's good. We haven't set up cores in our server, so we're gonna have to do that at some point. It's working now, so we're gonna wait till we actually hit an actual error before we do it. But cool, we have Apollo set up now. We're able to request this from our server. The next step is we're gonna set up GraphQL code generator. To do so, we're gonna go ahead and install the command line for it. So to do that, we're going to come to our web package here, and I'm going to say yarn add, and we're going to do as a dev dependency GraphQL codegen /CLI. And after this is finished running, what we're going to do is we're going to initiate it and initialize our project. They have a little CLI that will set up our project with a config. And basically we're going to get a little config over here, and that's where we can, for example, create a new folder here called GraphQL, and inside of it we can put all our queries. So for example, I can create our hello query, and we can write it like so. I'm just going to leave this import up here like so. And then what it's going to do is it's going to read this GraphQL query, and it's going to create a component for us that we can use. Well, in this case, a hook that we can use. All right, so that was finished. So now we can say npx GraphQL codegen initialize. So here, this is where we're going to fill out a little questionnaire. So I'm going to keep this selected, press enter. Where is your schema? So ours is at http //localhost 4000 /GraphQL. And here it's asking where our operations / fragments are. This is actually, we can do it in this way. I haven't written .GraphQL files in a while. Let's do that actually. So we can write this as a .GraphQL file like that, I think. So I'm going to say all mine are in the GraphQL folder here. So I'm going to say source /GraphQL/star. So I'm saying where to look for all your queries and mutations. In this case, I'm going to put them in this directory, source GraphQL, and then look for all the files that are star.graphql. Pick plugins, React Apollo. I actually don't want this one. I actually want the hooks. So we're going to check that off. Actually, maybe we need this. I don't know if we need this or not. I'm going to keep it for now, and maybe we'll remove it. And by the way, I was hitting spacebar to toggle that on and off. Where to write the output? I like to call mine. Nope, this is fine. I think we can keep the default. You hit enter just to keep the default. Do you want to generate an introspection file? No. Keep the default for the name. What script in your package.json? Call this gen. And then we'll hit enter. So now we'll clear that. And what that should have done is we now have a codegen.yaml file. And in our package.json, we should have a generate script. We should also have these 3 dependencies and also the generator. So now I'm going to say just run yarn to install those dependencies that it added. And then when they have installed, what we can do is we can run yarn gen, and it's going to generate this for us. And it looks like by default it may generate not hooks, so we're going to have to add a setting for that. So we're going to say yarn gen plugin. Oh, it needs the extension .tsx. So on line 5 here, we're going to add that. Just an X at the end. We'll regenerate this. Now we can go into here and we can see what is actually available to us. So that's the other thing. You see how it says unnamed _1 query? Basically, we got a bunch of TypeScript things. Whenever you write your queries now, you're going to want to write a name for them like this and give them a name. So I'm going to usually I just call it what the name of this is, but you can give them different names if you have queries that you use in multiple places. So I'm going to call this one just hello. And now we're going to generate this again. And now, perfect. Now we're actually going to get some actual stuff here. And now we can see we get some components. So if you want to use Apollo components or higher order components, this is how you do it. We're going to use hooks. So we're going to, and you can see it's red here. We need to change that. But this basically generates TypeScript types for us based on the GraphQL. And so this saves us work and automates some things. And you'll notice at the end result is this gets a little simpler. Alright, so let's go ahead and change our code gen over here so that it also accepts hooks. So at the very end here, we're going to add a config line, and then underneath it we can add what things we want to change. So for example, I want to say with HOC false, with components false, and with hooks true. So I'm turning off that I don't want it to generate components or higher order components for me, and that I just want hooks. So we'll give that a save, and then we'll regenerate this. And now we can come look at this. Oh, it looks like it still generated the components. Maybe this is with component. Yep, that looks like it fixed it. So now you can notice we are just importing from React hooks at the top here. And now we can see a single hook that it creates for us. It should be called use query. Use hello query hook. Yep. So now we have this function that we can use. So how do we actually use this now? Well, if we go to our app.tsx over here, instead of writing it like this, we can say use hello query. So nothing changes here now, but now if I say data, and data can possibly be undefined, so we can say if loading or not data. We're going to say dot 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 loading. Otherwise, I'm going to say dot, and now I can get some type information. I can see that this property has the word hello on it, and it's returning a string. And so that's what GraphQL Code Generator gives us, is we're going to know what the types of these are. So that's really nice. And we don't need to import that there anymore. So cool. We can see hello, hi at the top of our application over here still. And this is going to be our new workflow now. We're going to write a query like this, hello, then we're going to generate the types for it, and then in our component we're going to come over here and we can use that query there. So cool, we have GraphQL Code Generator all set up now. Next we want to create some pages, like a register page and a login page. So to create different pages, we're going to be using React Router to do our routing. So let's go ahead and install that package. So we're going to say yarn add React Router DOM. And then we also need to install types for it because this does not come with types. Oops. And then when that's done, in our app.tsx, I guess, is where we will put all our routes. So I want to rename this file to routes. In our index file over here, we need to change, oops, let's turn off my sound. So routes, and this should be routes, and now this should be routes. So just changing the name here because I want to put all of the routes in this particular thing, so it's very clear. And we're going to just install the types for React Router DOM here. So yarn add -d at types React Router DOM. And we'll let that run. And now what we can do is we're going to get rid of this use hello query. We don't need it. And kind of just clear out this file. And we can rename that to routes. And I do prefer using named exports like this. So I'm going to do that. And that means we're going to have to switch in the index again. So we'll do that in a second. So now we're going to be importing from React Router DOM. Get the browser router. And we're going to do a switch. And then we're going to have our routes. So route. And we're going to say not to, but path. And then we're just going to render hi. So just to verify everything is working, we're going to just say switch route, and we do a single indexed route here that just says hi. And then we're going to say exact here so it matches exactly the slash. And then our index over here, let's just update this to do a named import like that. So excellent. Let's just make sure our server hasn't crashed. Nice. So now if I come over here, did I just say hi like that? Yes. Let's do yo. Okay, good. Just want to make sure I'm putting too many highs. I wasn't sure if that was coming from GraphQL or was coming from this. Just wanted to verify. Nice. So we have this. Let's go ahead and now create the routes I talked about. So for example, we could create a new folder if you want to called pages. And inside of here, you can create a register. So RH, we're going to create a new component here called register. I've showed this a few times, but it'd be good to show if you haven't seen it. How I just did this was with a snippet. So if you go to code, preferences, user snippets, you can create your own by typing Typescript React. And I'll link this in the description below if you want to copy my snippet. But this is the snippet that I use for RH. This just creates a new React component for me. So I'm going to be using this a bit. So if you want to follow along, you can create this for yourself as well, or something similar to it. So it's import React, and then I do an empty interface props, and then it looks like this. Alright, so let's continue on. So we have our register here, and we're just going to say register page. And I'm going to create another one called login. And then we're going to have home. So one of the mistakes that I've done in previous kind of projects like this is not having an index page. So we're going to just create a little home page that links to all of our pages. So this is our home page, and in our routes here, let's create these 3 routes. So now we're going to say, oops, I want to kill to here. We're going to say component and pass in the home component here. And then we're going to have a slash register, slash login, Alright, so now we have our 3 routes for us here. Alright, we specify our paths and then our components where the path, what we should be rendering. And then we have our imports up here. Alright, so we can close this. Let's come over here to our home page and create a few links. So we're going to say link and we're going to say register, and then we're going to say login. Now we can just navigate to our pages there, and maybe this is good to actually have as just navigation that we have everywhere. So in that case, I'm going to copy this, go back to our routes, and the way you can add just like navigation to everything is I'm going to put on every page is you can do something like this. So we're going to have our div here that just wraps everything, and then we're going to have a header here, and then I'm going to paste in the header links. And I just did command period while having my cursor here, and that's how I was able to import all of those things. So we're importing link from React Router DOM, and then I think that was the only thing that auto imported. So now on our home over here, I can just say home page, and we don't really need anything else. Alright, so let's see what all that work got us. Make sure to save. Server's up, running good. So now I can click over to register, click over to login, and we can navigate our different pages. Nice. Could also make a thing for home if we want. So we did that pretty fast, so let's just recap what we did. So we created 3 different pages, and we also created basically a header component that we are rendering on all the pages. And we just have in our header component 3 links, and when we click on the link, it navigates between the pages. And so we have this routes using React Router. So that's cool. Now, why don't we go into our register and actually register some users. So just want to clean up, close a couple tabs there. So here we are going to basically just create a form to start off with. I think is going to be the best thing. And you could use a form library, but we're going to have such a simple form that we're just going to use regular state. So I'm going to say email, set email, and same for password. And we're going to have a form element. Wrapping everything. We're going to have a div inside of here. We're going to have an input. And the value is going to be email, placeholder, email. And then when this changes, we're going to say set email is equal to e.target.value. Alright, so this is how we're going to do our input field. So when we type, it's going to update the state in our email state there. Copy this. Do the same thing for our password. Alright, so I just replaced password there and set password for our on change. And then we can have a submit button. Or we can call it register. And we're going to make this button of the type submit. So what that will do is now when the user types enter or clicks that button, it's going to submit the form. So on submit here, By default, it refreshes the page. So we're going to say e.prevent default. And then here we're going to say form submitted with this email and this password. Also, we can set the input field here. Now we're not going to do that. I was going to say we can do a type email, but that doesn't really matter that much. I'm just going to say type password. That's the more important one because it's going to hide the password now. All right, so let's see this guy now. All right, so I got my console log here. I can now type some stuff, register, and now we can see the values submitted here that I use for both. So cool, that is just a basic React form that we built with just regular state to submit our form. Now, when I submit my form, I actually want to make a request to our server. So that request is a GraphQL request. So we're going to create a register.graphql file inside our GraphQL folder, and here's where we're going to write our register mutation. So that we're going to write in our playground. Can copy this if we want. Now we're not going to copy it because we need to add some variables first. So I'm going to name this register, and this is going to take an email, which is a string, and a password, which is a string. So you'll notice I'm putting a $sign in front of this. This is how you write variables in GraphQL. So you put that in front, and then you specify what the data type is. So in this case, a string. And then you can pass it in by doing the following. Email, password. And we're going to copy this, paste it over here. And the reason why we are doing it like so is now we can pass in arbitrary emails and passwords. So, like I said earlier, our now process is going to be we added a mutation. I'm now going to run yarn generate inside, or yarn gen inside the web folder. That's going to create a hook for us. So now, and you can click on GraphQL and look inside of it and see what the hook is if you want to. And then in our register, we're going to say const use register mutation. So we can call this register. So here you put brackets and then the name of whatever you want the function to be called. I'm calling mine register. And then we can say register, and we can pass in what our variable should be. In this case, our email and the password. And then we can get a response. I'm going to make this function asynchronous. Const response is equal to await register. And then we can console log the response. And, you know, let's go ahead and keep the form submitted just in case. Alright, so now let's try creating a user this way. So, React app over here. So I'm going to register a user, bob@bob2.com. And let's create it. You can see register is true. That means our user got created. And I think it'd be nice if we cleared the register form maybe when we did this, or maybe afterwards we take them to the home page or something like that. So let's take them to the home page after they submit their form. And before we actually do that, let's just verify that the register did work. So if I come back to our playground, our users tab, we can run this and see if a new user got created. It did. Perfect. We can also add this logic to our home page to see new users too. I think that would be good to do. So let's do those two things real quick. Alright, so we're not going to take any props really for our register here, so I'm going to get rid of it. It's a page. But we are going to say route component props. So this is a React router thing, or React router DOM thing really. And this gives us access. Well, we have access already to all the for example, history, and well, you can see if you put an object here and then control space, you can see what you have access to now thanks to Typescript. But to tell Typescript what you have access to, this is how you do it. These are the props that are passed in because we made it a route. So you see how we made register a route? This is us making it a route here. So what that's going to give us is this history prop. It's it's going to pass down to it, and the history prop allows us to say history dot push, and then we can go back to the home page. So now if I create a new user and we register, it's now going to take us to the home page. Nice. So now on my home page, that would be nice to just show who the users have signed up. So we're going to say users.graphql, and this one I kind of just have memorized, so we're going to just say query users ID, oops, and email. And we're going to generate that. And can go use users query. You can see it right there. And that's what we're going to use on our home page. Use users query. Now, if you want to pass any options to this, you can pass in an object here. The one I'm going to pass is going to be fetch policy network only. This just means that it is not going to read from the cache. It is going to make a request to our server every time. And that's what I want to happen. And this, we don't have to worry about updating the cache. So I'm going to say data, and I'm just going to say if not data, we know we're loading. Otherwise, I'm going to say users, and can pass this as a div. And we're going to have a unordered list that we're going to just display all of our users. So we're going to say data dot users dot map, and here we're going to say x dot email, and then we can have, I don't know, a comma and a space, and let's display their ID as well. And then whenever we're mapping through an array in React, we need to make sure we pass in a key. So we pass in the ID of the current user. So this is a unique value. That's a good idea for a key. So let's look at our users now. So I can see I have Bob1, Bob2, and we have this random dude here. So now if I register a new user, we come back to the home page and we can see our user available to us there. So now we can kind of just keep track of the users we've created so far. Nice. So now we have a register page. We can see all our users. The next step is to actually take one of these users and log in with it. We're going to head back over to VS Code and our login and start off. So we're going to copy our register stuff because the form is going to be basically the same. So I'm going to just get the entire component here and paste it in. And I'm going to command dot or command period on here, and that's going to allow me to add all missing imports. And I'm going to rename this to login. So now instead of use register mutation, we want to use login mutation. So I'm going to create a new file in our GraphQL folder called login.graphql, and we're going to come to our playground and do a similar thing here. So login, email, and I want to just copy this. Paste that in because we're going to use the same two variables. Email, and the password here. Now I'm going to copy that, paste it in here. So now we have our login mutation. We're going to generate the hook for it. Alright, so it should be in here now. And I like to also just click on the GraphQL file whenever I generate the types because VS Code caches the types, so it doesn't always update unless I click on the file and it does. And so that'll also help me get auto completion. So now when I type over here use login mutation is going to be available for us. And I'm going to rename this to login. And this should be login. Alright, so we'll give that a save. And now let's run this guy. Just want to make sure our server is up and good. It is. So now let's come over to our project. And I'm going to copy this guy because I remembered the password. And we're going to try logging in. So I'm going to say login. Well, I thought we were on the register page. Let's rename our button down here to login. Alright, so I'm going to log in. And looks like it worked. I can see my access token here. Perfect. And it redirected me to the home page. Now, the other thing that we want to get working here is we have access to the access token. We want to make sure we're also getting the refresh token working as well. And my guess is it's not going to work by default, but we're going to see. So I'm going to go into my cookies. I have some stuff inside of here. I think this could be old. I'm not sure if the cookie is being automatically set or not. So I'm just going to clear this and we're going to start over and make sure this is working. So I have inspect open, right click inspect to open this, application, cookies, and then localhost 3000. So let's log in. Can log in here. Looks like no cookie got set. This is what I expected. We need to change some things. And if we look in our console over here, sorry, our network tab, we can click on GraphQL. We can filter it by it. And look for one that says post request. And if we hit preview, there should be one that has the word login. Cool. So what we're looking for in this request is a response headers, and in here we should see it say set cookie, similar to how we were seeing it when we were doing the playground, and we don't. So why is that? Well, there's a few things we need to do to get this working. The first thing is we did not in our index, so in our web over here when we create Apollo client, set credentials to include. So we're going to do that. So now when we actually send the login request, this is actually taking a little bit to load. Just refresh. Is this my login page? No, that's my home page. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is what I was waiting for. I was like, I was expecting this error a really long time ago. So now we're actually finally getting it. So we have a problem with our cores. So I want to teach you guys also how to read this error message, because this is a very common one when you're doing web dev stuff. So it says access to fetch. All right, so this is the server we're trying to access. That's this first string. So we're trying to access this server, and we're trying to access it from localhost 3000, which we are. And it says it's been blocked because the value is equal to star. And this is the main things you want to read is, all right, I'm requesting this server from here. And then you want to see, it says the value of the header must not be a wildcard. So you want to see what the value of it currently is. So, all right, so the current cores value we're sending back is a star, and it says we can't send back a star. So we know we need to change the cores value now. And also it says this occurs when we set credentials to include. So now what I like to do to actually fix this and change cores is to go to our server. So I'm going to close this stuff. And I'm going to go back to our server and our index over here. So by default, Apollo will actually do cores for us, but in my opinion, it's a little bit easier to set up if we just ignore the cores that Apollo gives us. So we can do that by where we call Apollo server.apply middleware, setting cores to false. And now we can add cores ourselves. So we're going to head back to our server. So I'm going to cd into the server folder, and I'm going to say yarn add cores. So we're going to actually add cores ourselves. And this is going to be some express middleware that we're going to add. And we also need to install the type for it. So yarn add @d cores. Alright. I actually don't know if we need the types or not. It looks like they do exist. For some reason I just had like a glimpse in my memory that maybe I feel like I've installed cores before and it had types, but I can't remember. Alright, so we're going to import cores like this, and then we can say app.use cores And then there's a couple things we want to say. First, credentials true. That way we can send back a cookie. And then what our origin is. So the origin is whatever we want to accept. So the error we were getting is because the origin was set to star. And so when we were trying to request this, it said you cannot have star as the origin. So what should we set it if it shouldn't be star? Well, it should be localhost 3000. Right? And again, so let's look at this again. Let's say I mess this up and I write the wrong origin. Like, I think this is the wrong origin, that we have to put HTTP in this and not just this. How can we know if we mess this up? First off, let's make sure our server has restarted and all that good stuff. It has. And now I'm going to refresh over here. And now let's take a look about how our error has changed. So now it says we're trying to access from this origin. And it says it's been blocked by cores. It says the header value is equal to this. Right? So our header value is localhost 3000 when we're trying to request from this origin. So they don't, basically it's saying these two values don't match. And this is going to be very common. So I've had this happen to me before. And so all you have to do is take the origin that it tells you to right here, and that's the origin you want to put on your server. So I'm going to copy this. And so that's basically what I do to debug and fix the cores problems. So now I can set my origin to here, and that's basically the right thing. Whatever our front-end React website is, the URL for it, that's what we want to set as our origin. Alright, so we're going to save this, and now if we refresh, we should be able to actually request the users again. So perfect. Now when I log in, we should be getting a cookie back. So this is the fun part where we're going to see if this all worked. Actually, let me go copy my user. Alright, so we have application. So no cookie is set. Paste this in. You can also see the network tab. We can clear it. Can run this. So I'm going to click on this. I can see the post request, and this is where we get to do some fun debugging. Maybe let's see if the cookie showed up. Okay, the cookie showed up. We just don't see a header. For whatever reason, sometimes Chrome shows the header, sometimes it doesn't. I thought maybe it didn't work because it didn't show the header, but you saw it in the playground. It would say like set cookie header. For whatever reason, it's hiding it from me right here, so I don't see it in the response header. But I do see the cookie got set, because if I go to application cookies, I see the JID cookie got set, and I can see the value here. So our refresh token is in our browser. We have access to the access token here. So we have our two tokens available to us. One's in a cookie, one we're going to use and set in a variable. But I want to just recap real quick for those of you that had problems with the cookie, what you need to do. So first, this is very important, getting your cores set up. So you notice I said app.use. Make sure you have this at the very beginning here, or as early as you can. It's very important to add the cores before you actually apply middleware. So make sure you apply middleware after this has been added. Also make sure your origin and it says credentials set to true. And then back in our website, make sure when you start or when you create the Apollo client that you have credentials set to include. So if you have all those things, the cookie should be getting set and you can see it there. Okay, so what I want to do next is we can log in and get an access token. We want to use that access token and send it up in the header whenever we make requests. So for example, we made a request over here called buy, and this request requires you to be logged in to access, and we had to send an authorization bearer token up in there to get that to work. So we want to do the same thing in our React app. So we're gonna just copy this buy and we're gonna put it inside of here. So buy.graphql, and so I just want to run this query, and we're gonna just run this query and see if it works or not. And if it works, that means we're logged in. If it doesn't work, that means we're not logged in. Okay, so we have this. Let's generate the types for it. Good, so now let's create a new page, which I'm going to call buy.tsx. We're going to use the buy query, and we're going to see if we get any errors. So if error, we'll console log the error and return error. Otherwise, we can just return that it worked. And actually, I guess we can display the data. Also, we need to know if it's loading. So if loading, we're going to return div loading. And then if there's an error, we're going to display that there's an error. If for some reason there's not any data, we're going to say no data. Otherwise, we can display data.py. Alright, so the whole purpose of this component is just to try to access some authenticated data. So we're going to create a new route for it called /by. And we'll create a new header as well. Alright, so now we can link and actually go to this page. So let's just try it out and see what happens. So if we click on this, we can see we get an error. You can see exactly what the error is if we open up our console probably. Yep, so it says we are not authenticated. Alright, so now we're going to fix this. We want to be able to log in and send the access token in the header. So how do we do this? Well, first step is to actually store the access token somewhere. So I said we're just going to store the access token in a JavaScript variable, in this case TypeScript, but we're just going to create a file called accesstoken.ts, and we're going to export let access token. It's an empty string. So this is just going to be a global variable that we can access the access token from. So now when I log in, what I'm going to do is we get the response. So after we log it, we can just say access token. Well, first we can just say if we got a response and response.data. If this just is checking to make sure we didn't get any errors from the login for some reason. So this assumes it worked. Then if it worked, we can say access token is equal to response.data.login.access token. And this is just going to be imported. I'm going to restart my TypeScript server. So just again, that's Command-Shift-P, and then restart TypeScript server. You can just type it up here. And so now this should be able, yep, I can auto import this. And because it's not a variable, this is a string. Oh, you know what? It doesn't let me just set a variable like this. I thought I could do this for some reason, but I guess it doesn't like it. I'm not sure if this is a TypeScript thing. So what we're going to do instead is we can create a function here called setAccessToken. And we can make a function called getAccessToken. So now from getAccessToken, we'll just return the value. Oops. And then here we will set it. So now in our login, we can call setAccessToken. So it's still going to be a kind of a global variable. We just have functions that wrap it now to set and access it. Okay. And we don't need to use register mutation up there, so I'll remove that. So now we have this stored in a variable. The next thing is to actually send this in a header. So to do this, we're going to come back to our index file over here, and we're going to say on each request, we have access to the operation, and what we can do is we can say operation.setContext, and we can set the headers. And the header we want to set is the authorization header. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const access token is equal to get access token. And then if there is an access token, we're going to do bearer and then pass in our access token. Otherwise, we can just pass an empty string for the authorization header. We're just not logged in. The other way we could do this is if we have an access token, then we can actually set the authorization header. So we could do it in this way too. So we only do this if we happen to have an access token. And we're going to handle the case where it's expired in a second. But now when we log in and then make a GraphQL request, what's going to happen is we're going to read the access token and we're going to set the header, and so this should be sent with the request. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to just go to home, copy this user. We're going to log in real quick. Alright, so we are logged in. Now let's try coming to buy. And nice, it worked. It says your user ID is 2. So we successfully logged in and sent our access token to the server now. This is great, but now when we refresh the page, because we're storing the access token in just a variable, it's going to go away. So if we refresh, we can see now we get an error. So what we're going to do now is when the page first loads, we're going to try refreshing our token to get a new access token. So the user stays logged in even when they refresh the page. So to do that, we're going to head over and create a new component, which I'm going to call app.tsx. And app over here, what he's going to do is just render our routes. So now in our index over here, I'm going to render app instead of routes. And really, this guy is useless right now, but what I want to add to him is the actual refresh. So let's do that. So by default, I'm going to be loading. So I'm going to say true. And we're going to set, we can have our set loading here. So we're going to say if loading, return a div loading ... So here we can set some kind of loading animation, or in this case you could return just null, or you could do a div, whatever you want to do to indicate that your app's loading, you can put it here. And what we're going to do here is have a use effect. And we're going to do this just once when the application mounts. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to refresh our token and get a new access token. So here I'm going to say fetch, and we're going to send a request to localhost 4000/refresh token. And we need to say credentials set to true, that way we can receive a new cookie. And why is it upset? Oh, this needs to be set to include not true. So we're going to say fetch.then. And this is getting long, so let me save it. You can't do async and await. So I couldn't just await this fetch right here inside a use effect. So what we're going to do is just .then syntax. So we're saying .then, and we can say x.json.then. And so we're doing, so this is how you get the information back from a fetch request, is we say x.json, we want to read the JSON data. This is going to return us another promise. And actually, let's clean this up a little bit. Instead, let's make this asynchronous. And then we can just await it here. I think this is a lot cleaner to look at. And I'm just going to console log what data is giving us back. And then after this, we can say set loading to false. So the idea is before our app renders, right? So by default, we're just going to display this. Then when it's displaying that, we're going to try to refresh the token. And then after it's done that, we're just going to say false, and then we load our entire application. So let's see this in action. It says not found. Did I call it something else? I actually just forgot what I called the route. So let's go to our server and index. I called it /refresh token. /refresh token. And oh, I just need to make this a GET request, or sorry, a POST request. So by default, when you do fetch, you do a GET request by default. I haven't done REST API requests in a while, but there we go. Let's give it another try. And now we can see what the top response is. Awesome. So in this case, it was able to get us a new access token, and we can see OK is equal to true. So perfect. So now here I can say access token, and we can say set access token is equal to this access token. Then I'm going to get rid of the console log there, but if you want, you can keep it. So let's see what the end result is. So now if I refresh, it's going to load, and then it's going to display the application, and we're going to be logged in, and we're going to get a new access token. All right, so we can refresh a couple times, see it in action, and cool. So now we are persisting the user between refreshes. And again, just to recap how we're doing that is before we render our application, we are sending a request to our server, and we are sending basically our refresh token to get a new access token. And with this new access token, we're then just setting it before we load our application. Now just to show you, if we were to say delete our refresh token and we refresh, we're going to get an error here. So perfect. So now we're going to handle the case where our access token has expired. And we may not have refreshed the page, but we're just kind of browsing the website. It has expired, and then we try making a request. We don't want the user to be logged out. So let's see how we can handle that. So the first thing that I want to do just to show you how this happens is we're going to go to our auth on our server, and instead of having 15 minutes time for our token, let's make it 15 seconds. So I'm going to save that, close our server for now, and I'm going to head to our buy function or buy component. Here I'm just going to say network only for the fetch policy. So what this means is every time we visit this page, it's just going to make a new request to get the data. So that'll help show what's going on here. So let's log in. And now we see our ID is 2. Now we come back to home. If we come to the network tab, we can clear this and see what happens. Now let's hope it's been 15 seconds. It hasn't. So we'll wait. Cool, now it's been 15 seconds. So you notice I was just kind of clicking back and forth between the links until it's been 15 seconds. My token has expired. I tried making a request and we got an error here. So the user should never experience this. It should just seamlessly refresh in the background. So how are we going to do that? Well, we know when the token expires. So basically what we want to do is we want to check if the token has expired. And if it has, we want to get a new one before we do the request. So to help us out with this, we are going to be using this library called Apollo Link Token Refresh. And to use this library, we create a link, and we need to pass this link to apollolink.from. And to be able to do this, we need to migrate off of Apollo Boost. So we're using Apollo Boost over here to just create our Apollo client. And so we no longer can use Apollo Boost because we need to have a special link. So we're going to follow this guide to migrate away from Apollo Boost. I recommend coming to it because we're going to be copying a big chunk of code and basically trimming some stuff. So if you go to the after portion of this, we are going to copy this right here. copy this entire thing. And I'll link this below in the description, but you're just going to go to the Boost Migration Advanced Migration section, and we're going to paste this in. I'm also going to try to go through this slowly because there's a few things that we need to cut. So let's start at the very top. We're not going to be using Apollo link state, so we can remove that. And we're no longer going to need Apollo client from Apollo Boost. The rest of this we can keep, and all these things were automatically installed for us when we installed Apollo Boost, so I'm just going to keep them for now, not like individually install them. Okay, so here we're creating an in-memory cache. We don't really need to pass any settings to ours, so we're going to do that. This request function, we already wrote our own, so we can kill it. This is the thing that we want to keep. So this is the request link, and it's creating a new Apollo link. We're going to say handle is of the type any to get rid of a type error. And then right here you can see this is where we're adding, or can add, we have access to the operation. So if we scroll down to what we were doing before, you'll notice with the operation we did this. So we're going to copy this and paste it up here. Alright, so this code right here was where we would get the access token and set the context. That way we could send the access token in the header. So we're going to put that logic right smack here. And then nothing else needs to change with this new Apollo link here. So if you're typing this out, this is what it looks like. We're going to keep this handle stuff that Apollo gave us. We're not going to make any changes. Really the only reason we have this request link is because we want to set the context. And we may be able to use the set context from Apollo to clean this up a bit, but we got this from Apollo migration guide, so I'm fine using just that too. Alright, so now this is us creating the actual client. On error, this is going to alert us when we get a GraphQL error. For now, I'm just going to print the error. We can kill this with the client state. And the new HTTP link, we just need to change the URI to the one that we are using, which is this little post one. Alright, now we can delete our old client, and this is our new client. So we haven't added any additional logic. This is just the equivalent non-Apollo Boost version of creating the client. So again, so here's the client. We're creating a custom, well, we're not really creating a custom link, but we're creating a new link based off of catching errors, this request link thing, which is really just setting a header. And then this HTTP link, which is going to actually do the request for us. And then we're going to pass in the cache. We pass in the cache. So on top of this, this is where we're going to add this library. So the whole point of doing that is we can now add this new refresh link. So if you want to copy this logic as well, come to this GitHub repo. So I'm going to copy all of this, and I'm going to paste it in here. Alright, so let's start from the top. First thing is, let's actually add this library to our code. I did not mean to copy all that. Okay. So it is called Apollo link token refresh. So I'm going to copy that. And this library was written in Typescript, so we're going to get types and don't need to do anything else for it. I'm going to copy this import statement. And we'll add it to top. Alright, so the first function that we're going to write here is, or fill out, is this one right here, which is token valid or undefined? So the logic for this is going to be first to get our token. So we're going to say get access token. And then we're going to check if we don't have a token. So if we don't have a token, then we can return true. The token's undefined. Next, what we want to do is try reading the token and see if it is both a valid token it's like not malformed, and 2, that it has not expired. So we're going to say try catch, and we're going to decode the token inside of this. So if it has any kind of error, we're going to say false, the token is invalid. And so after this, inside of here, we want to be able to decode this token, and to do that, we're going to install a library called JWT decode. So JWT-decode, we're going to yarn add it. And this we need to install the Typescript types for. And when that's done, we're going to import it from the top here. And let's install the types for it. Yarn add-d at types / JWT decode. And now what we can do is we can say const expiration is equal to JWT decode and then our token. So here we get the payload of the token. Something that's automatically added to the payload for us is when the token expires, and that's of the form exp. So we can just get that by doing this. Next, we want to just check if it's expired. So we're going to say if the current date is greater than the current expiration date of the token, right? And then we have to multiply this times 1,000 because I believe this is in microseconds or milliseconds. I don't remember. I just remember this calculation I did a while back ago to get these things to match. And then we're going to return false, else we're going to return true. Right, so the logic is if the current time is greater, that means we've passed when the token has expired. So now it is invalid, so we're going to return false, the token is not valid. Otherwise, we know the token is still valid, so we're returning true here. Sweet. So here is the logic for checking whether a token is valid or invalid. You can also, if you want to check any kind of other check here, you could. This is really all that I think is necessary for now for that. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is the fetch access token. So this is the actual fetch function to get the new access token. So for us, we already wrote that, so we can just copy this from our app. And then handle fetch, this is going to actually read the access token from the response. So to be able to read it, we have to pass in what our field name is. I called mine access token camel case like this, so I'm going to pass in that. So it's access token field and then whatever you called it. And then here we have access to the access token. All we really need to do is set the access token now. I think it auto imported something for me. Yeah, I don't want this. There's nothing I need to do in the handle response, but go ahead and read the comment here in case in your application you need it. And then here we can handle any kind of error. We're just going to say your refresh token was invalid, try relogging in. And you know what, let's console log the actual error itself. I don't have to get rid of that. Okay, so we'll keep this, and then that's it. I think we have it all set up. Let's give it a try now. So again, let's see this in action, then I'll explain exactly what this is actually doing for us. Well, I don't think I started my server, so start that back up. And so what we're going to be looking for is in our network log here. So we want to keep the inspector open and keep the network log open. We're going to just clear here. And we're going to go to home. And we're going to kill our refresh token and just restart from the beginning. Alright, so I have no access token, I have no refresh token, and we have to refresh. There we go. I'm going to copy this from the home so I can log in. Alright, so now I have an access token. I can access by. And now I'm going to look at the network tab. When it's been 15 seconds, what I'm going to notice in the network tab is we're going to refresh when I try making a request. So we're going to clear this. I think it's been about 15 seconds now. I'm going to click on buy, and you'll notice one of the requests was to the refresh token route. And we can see that it sends us back a token, and we can see the user's data is buy now, and we get that data back. So you notice to the user, they have no idea that this is happening, and this is something that they just are seamlessly using the site now, and we just do in the background whenever the token has expired, we refresh a new one for them. And so they can just go on using the site, making requests, and we handle the case where we need to make an extra request to get the refresh token for them. Right, and you can see as I was going back and forth, every 15 seconds it fetches a new token. And so yeah, so that is what our link here is now doing, is it checks if the token is valid or not. If it's not valid, it's going to call this function and get a new access token for us. And then it's going to set that access token here. And then that access token is actually used in the request itself. And that's how we're able to just continue using the site with it. So now that we got that working, we're pretty much done with persisting the user's session. When they refresh, they're going to stay logged in, and as they use the application, they're going to be kept in the same session, and we're going to just refresh in the background. So we can go back to setting our access token back to 15 minutes now. So I'm just going to go back to the auth file that we have and change 15 seconds to 15 minutes now. I'm pretty much good with that. Now the only difference is going to be that we check to refresh the token every 15 minutes now instead of 15 seconds. The other thing I just wanted to mention is I didn't know if I really went over when this handle error function gets called in our token refresh link. So this gets called whenever it tries to fetch an access token, and this endpoint sends back an error. In our particular access point, the way I made it is we don't throw errors back, we just send back an empty refresh token. So if your application sends back an error, this function will be called. In this case, this function is really not going to ever be called unless the server is just like totally down or something. But this doesn't send an error. So just note that that's when this is called, and depending on how your server responds, this may be called or may not be called. In this case, it's totally fine for us not to do anything in this because, well, we're just never going to see it called in this the way we set it up. Alright, the other thing I just want to mention real quick is this token refresh link logic gets called on every GraphQL request to check whether the token is invalid. So it only does something if it finds the token to be invalid though. Alright, so that's that. The next thing that I wanted to go over was how to actually fetch the user. Say I want to display who the current user is in the header or somewhere in the application itself. So one way we could do that is by reading the token. So we could just go to our access token over here and read the data inside of it, assuming we have one. Now the way we set this up, I don't particularly like it because we have this in a global variable. So accessing this in React is kind of could run into problems because whenever the access token changes, it doesn't cause our React application to refresh or re-render. Now, if I wanted to actually go with this method and read the information from the access token, I would recommend sticking this in some kind of state management library so you know when the token has changed and it causes React to re-render and you get the new data. But I'm not going to do it like that in this case. Instead, I'm just going to request the data from the server. So we're going to make a Apollo query called me, and we're going to get the current user that way. So both ways work. It just depends on your use case whether you want to read from a token or just get the data from your server, because maybe you don't want to actually put this data inside of a token, because note, all the data inside of JWT is accessible, it's public. Alright, so with that said, let's go ahead and add this. So we're going to start with creating a new query in our user resolver on the server. So I like to call this query me, and it's going to return a user or null. So to allow us to send back null responses, we can say comma, and then in an option, we can say nullable is true. So inside me right here, I want to do something very similar to our isAuth middleware. So I'm hitting command and then click to go view it. So I'm going to just copy some of this code here and paste it here. So we need to access the context. Context is equal to my context. So inside of me here, we're going to read the authorization header to see if the user sent us an access token. If not, we are going to return null. So we want to return nulls instead of returning an error. And then we can verify from JSON Web Token. I hit command and period to bring up that little menu to import this for me. And we're going to turn null here as well. And if it makes it all the way down here, we're going to return null. Otherwise, we're going to return user.findOne, and we're going to say payload.userid. So whenever we verify the token and get the payload inside of it, the payload, assuming it is a valid token, we have stored in there the user ID. And you can see it's giving me an error. Just say that the payload is of type any here. And so we're going to use that user ID inside the token to fetch the user. So this is where we can get all the fields that we want from the user and return it here. I guess we actually never get to this point, so we can just remove this null. Okay, so again, to recap, what this me query is doing is we read the token from the header. If there is no token at all, we just return null. There's no currently logged in user. Otherwise, we parse the token, make sure it's valid, and we use the user ID inside the token to get the user. And we return that user here. Oops, I do not want a new version Docker. Actually, remind me later. Maybe I do. Okay, so we can now make this request from our front end. So I'm going to create a new GraphQL query called me.graphql, and we can go back to our GraphQL playground to write this out. Could say me, and then we can get our email and ID. And again, you may have more fields to add to this than we do, so you can fetch as many as you want from the user. We have it pretty simple right now, and we're going to generate the types for this. And then we're pretty much done. Now we can use this query wherever the heck we want it. So let's say we want to get this in the header. So I'm going to create just a new function to make this real simple. Or I could just, I could do it up here. Now let's just make a new component. So I'm going to make a component called header.tsx. And I'm going to copy my header guy. And we just need to import link from React Router DOM. And now we're going to render our header and our routes. So now inside of here, we can just call our me query. And I'm going to make this just network only to make my life easy right now. So it's just always going to request from the server. But feel free to deal with updating the cache and all that fun stuff in Apollo if you want to. So we're going to say data and loading. Or I'm not even going to worry about loading for this, for the case that we're going to do. So all I'm going to do now at the bottom here is data. Otherwise, we're just going to return, actually not an empty string, null. All right, so if we get data, and we get a user, right? Because this thing can sometimes be null. Then we can display a div that says you are logged in as data.me.email. Alright, so now in the header we are loading the current user and just displaying it. So let's check out our application. So currently I can see I am logged in as Bob at bob2.com. So perfect. And if I want to here, I guess we don't really have a logout function. We should add that. What I was going to say is let's see what this looks like if we're not logged in. And maybe instead of null, let's go back to our header and say not logged in. And okay, so this is actually kind of a funny thing is we don't want to show them this message not logged in if this happens to just be loading. So we actually do need to know if this is loading. So we're going to say let body is equal to null. So this is usually what I like to do if there's like 3 states. And we're going to set this to type any. Is I say if we're loading, body is equal to null, else if data and data.me body is equal to this. Did I copy that? Else body is equal to this. And then down here, I just display body. And I'm displaying null for loading. You could also do something else for loading if you wanted to here. But this could also, you could extend this if you have more states. But this is usually what I do if I want to display multiple different states for a particular, like one single space. So sweet. So I'm going to go to my application, get rid of my refresh token, and just refresh the page. So we can see we're not logged in now. And now when we log in, we should set the me query. So we're going to go to our pages, log in, and here we just want to make a change where we update the cache after the user logs in. Because right now we're not doing that, and take a look what's going to happen. So we try logging in, and it logs in just fine, but this header does not update. So we just need to let Apollo know that we actually have a user now. So the way we can do that is in our login right here, we're going to say update, and we're going to have access to the store and then what the response is. But the thing is here, we're actually not returning a user from login. So I actually want to do that so I can get that information and update the current user. So let's go to our server real quick and just send back the current user. So this is in user resolvers, and at the very top we have our login response. So all we're going to add is we also now return a user. And this is a type that we need to explicitly say what the data type of it is for GraphQL. So that's why I'm doing this. Alright, so now in our login down here, we're just going to also include the current user. So what that allows us to do is in our GraphQL, you can say user ID email. And now we're going to have access to that right here. So we can say data, and we need to regenerate the types because we made some changes to it. And I just want to see what kind of type definitions we're going to give for this. I think it says data could possibly be null. So if it is, we're going to return null. And data dot login dot user. So I'd like to update the cache and set the current user equal to this. So I'm going to say store.writeQuery. And so my query is going to be the me document, and my data is equal to this. Now, something you want to make sure you do when you update the Apollo cache like this is that all the same fields that you're getting when you log in the user, you're also fetching in the me. So for me, I have ID and email, and in login, I have ID and email, so they match. So let's see if I set this all up correctly. So we're going to kill the refresh token, refresh, and now try logging in. And to grab our Bob at bob.com. And go to our console. Looks like I'm just missing a field in me. So I wanted to show you guys this. So it's very easy to mess up what you write down for your data. So I did not format it correctly for this query. So because of that, we get this error in our console, missing field me in this. Now the easiest way to figure out what the heck you're doing wrong is to actually add type definitions for this. So here you can actually pass in me query and the actual type for this. And then I can do an object and just get straight auto completion. So it expects possibly a type name like that, and the me value we know is actually a user, so it should be like this. Something I wanted to just tell you guys too, if you control space, it's going to actually autocomplete query for you for the type name here. This is also optional, so we probably don't need it. But now we can see this is the structure that it was expecting, and we can see we're no longer getting an error because it's checking the structure of this against what this type is here in the me query. And this was something that's auto-imported from us from the generated GraphQL types up here. Alright, so we have our me document that we're passing in. This is now the correct data. So let's try this one more time. Clear our cookie, refresh, login. And now you can see as we log in, it now displays the current user. So perfect, that's exactly what I wanted. And now anywhere that we actually want to display the user, we just use this hook, this use me query hook, and we have access to the user. So feel free to use this all over your application to get the current user. And I just want to mention, if you are going to place the use me query in your application, that I'd recommend just looking into how the fetch policy works, because you probably don't want to use network only everywhere, because this will not utilize the cache. But what you can get Apollo to do is cache the result of the me query, so you can use it all over your application, and then it only sends one request to the server. So that's pretty nice. And so we can just remove the fetch policy to get that behavior by default. Network policy, or network only, I like to set if I'm testing, and then when I'm actually ready to start doing stuff and updating the cache with Apollo, I'll do it like this. Alright, so one other thing that I wanted to do that I didn't mention at the beginning of this, but I thought that'd be helpful to fit in, is how to actually log the user out. So I kind of have been manually doing that by actually going in and killing the refresh token in the cookie. And so basically when we kill the refresh token, then the user can't log in anymore, or can't do anything. We also need to clear the access token as well. Now, we're going to actually do this where we can create a button the user can click on, and it's going to actually log them out. So let's go ahead and implement that. So to start off, what we're going to do is just create an endpoint on our server to clear this cookie. Because this is an HTTP only cookie, we can't access this through our website or in React. We're going to have to, on our server, remove it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new user resolver, and we're going to create a mutation. And this mutation is just going to be called logout. Doesn't need any arguments. We are going to need to know the context though. And the type is going to be my context. And we're fine to just return a boolean from this. And all we need to do is get the response. And similar to how when we log a user in, is that up here? No, down here. At the end, we send a refresh token, and this is the token we send. We want to send a refresh token that is empty, and that will log the user out. So I'm going to say send refresh token, send a response, and then just an empty string. And that will log the user out. We could also do res.clearCookie, which will send back an empty cookie, and it will expire it right away. That's another option. I like just using our send refresh token function, because then I make sure I'm creating the cookie with the same name and the same attributes and all that matches up. So cool. So now that I have this mutation, I can call this from my React application and it will clear the refresh token out for us. So let's go ahead and use this. So I'm going to go into GraphQL and create a logout.graphql. And I'm going to say mutation, logout, and all we're going to do is call logout. And there's nothing else we need to add to this because we're not selecting any fields or anything. And I'm just going to generate the types for this, and I'm going to I turned off my server, so I'm going to restart it. Or actually, JK, I kept it on. And yep, my server's back on too, so perfect. So both my servers are on. I generated the types. We can now utilize this logout button and then go see what it does. So I'm going to click on graphql.tsx to load it in. And let's go to our routes. So actually, I guess we have our header component now. We're going to go into our header component and we're just going to add a new button here. Button logout. Alright, so we want to log out the user when they click on this. So what we're going to do is up here, we're going to say logout is going to be a use logout mutation. And I'm going to make this asynchronous. So we're just going to call logout. And that'll go ahead and clear our refresh token. But the other thing that I want to do is actually clear our access token as well. So I'm going to say set access token is equal to a empty string. Or actually, I want to set it to null. So if I click on this, I'm going to allow us to pass in a string, or actually, you know what? We're doing an empty string for default. We don't have to pass in null. We'll just do this. That'll be the same effect. We just want to have something that is no token. Then that's what that value is. So we clear the refresh token. We clear the access token. Whenever you're using Apollo, it's also a good idea to reset the store whenever you log the user out. So right here, the second parameter of the mutation here, we can actually get access to the Apollo client. And then down here, I can say await client.reset. This is what client sometimes undefined. Yep, I'm just going to assume that it's defined, and you can assume something's defined in Typescript by putting an exclamation point. And we're going to say dot reset store. Alright, so let's start running this now. So what should happen is we should kill the refresh token, we should kill the access token, and then we should clear the cache. So everything should be reset after this. So I'm just going to refresh the page here. We have our logged out button here. You can see I'm still logged in as my bob@bob.com. So I'm going to press log out, and we can see I'm no longer logged in. I can see the value of my refresh token is empty. And now if I try going to buy, you can see we're not logged in. So nice. And if we want to, we can conditionally show this log out button and only show it if you're logged in. So we know they're logged in if it's not loading and we have a current user. Alright, so we're going to say not loading and data.me. So if all those conditions are true, we're going to display our button here. And we could do a ternary, so it is, if it's true, we're going to display this. Otherwise, we're just going to display null. And then we won't see our logged out button right here. But now if I log back in, don't have Bob on my clipboard right now. Let's copy that. You can see we're logged in and we have this option to log out. So awesome. So now we can log the user out whenever we want to, or the user themselves can press this button and log themselves out. Now, one last thing that I'd like to do is just set the path of our refresh token. Now, the reason why I want to do that is right now, every request we send, we're actually sending our refresh token with it. So for example, if I go to the by route and I click on the GraphQL requests in the network, I can click on headers and see what the request header is. And, oh, does it not show cookies? I thought it was going to show me cookies here. I guess maybe it doesn't show the cookie for in Chrome for some reason. So what I was going to show is that the cookie was sent on every request with the header, but Chrome is not showing it to me, so there's no way to see it. Maybe if I open this in Firefox, we can see it. Not now. So I'm going to log in as this user. And we're at the network tab. I'm going to clear. And now I'm going to go to our by route and we can look at our post request. And this is what I wanted to show you guys. So you can, let's lift this up and let's zoom in a little bit. It doesn't let me zoom into the panel of this. But if you go to the request headers, you can actually see that we are sending a cookie. Here's our JID cookie. And what we'd like to do is we only want to send the refresh token up whenever the user goes to refresh their token. So we can do that by modifying the path on our cookie. So I'm going to go to our send refresh token and just say that our path is /refresh_token. So now what this will do is now when I try to send a request, and I should clear my cookie, so I go to storage, let's clear all these. I'm not as familiar with the Firefox inspector. I'm just going to backspace and kill all of those cookies. So refresh, it's gone. Let's log in. Alright, so I see my refresh token here, and you can see that it's on the path refresh_token now. So now if I go to the network tab, and I clear this, and now I go to buy, I click on my request, I can see that there is a cookie, or at least we actually don't want to send any cookies right now, and I don't see my cookie in the request header at all. So that looks like it did work with the path. And now if I were to say refresh the page, right, we should have sent a request to the refresh token, and we can see that our cookie is being sent in the request header now. So what that path is doing is it's now restricting, and we're only sending the refresh token for when we want to actually refresh it. So this is just a good practice to start doing. So cool, we are done with everything that I wanted to go through in this tutorial. For those of you that made it to the end, I hope you liked it and you got some value out of it. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who wants to learn or needs to learn about JWT authentication.